call to order the meeting of the Fire and Police Commission for April 27, 2003 at 3:02 p.m.
2023.
2023, yes. Nicole, would you mind taking roll call?
Commissioner Herrlinger.
Present.
Commissioner Hill.
Hill, yes, that's me. Present.
Vice Chair Dozer.
Here.
And Chair Rodriguez.
Present.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any changes to the agenda that's requested by staff or commissioners?
I actually have a request for us. Today on the agenda, there's a dance permit application for Whiskey Richards. And if all the commissioners have read the information provided to us, I think we'd be ready to take a vote.
Without a presentation?
Yes, thank you.
Are commissioners in agreement with that?
My only question is the applicant here prepared to make a presentation, and were we cutting off their opportunity to do so? Because there's also a public that gets to see all this that we haven't necessarily read.
Oh, he is coming. Yeah. Chair Rodriguez, the applicant, is on their way to share remarks. So we can shorten the staff comments and presentation and go right to if there's any public comment. Yeah.
Okay, sounds great to me. Can we make that note for the minutes?
Chair Rodriguez, I would just suggest, since they're not there, just keeping it where it falls in the schedule.
Yes.
And when the time comes, staff can rest on the paper submitted to the Fire and Police Commission, but also allow an opportunity then for the appellant to do that. So we can easily do that. We can just rest on the paper submitted. But I would suggest waiting until that item comes up then.
That's fine.
Okay. So moving on to item number 4, general public comment. Now is the time for members of the public in person or online to make a comment on items not on today's agenda. Nicole, do we have any slips or anyone online?
Chair Rodriguez, nobody has raised their hand online and nobody in person.
Okay. So we will move to item number 5, approval of the meeting minutes for March 23. Are there any changes to the minutes?
No.
Chair Rodriguez, no.
And any public comment for this item?
Chair Rodriguez, no.
Do we have a motion to approve the minutes of March 23 Fire and Police Commission? Commissioner Hellinger?
I move approval of the minutes.
Okay. We have a motion by Commissioner Herlinger to approve the minutes. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Commissioner Dozer. Any discussion or objections? Okay, so we'll take a vote.
We'll take a vote. I'm going to try to have you vote on your screen. So this motion was moved by Commissioner Herrlinger, second by Vice Chair Dozer, to approve the minutes from March 23rd, 2023. And on your screen, if you give it a moment. And motion carries.
Thank you. And we will move to item number 6, dance permit application for Whiskey Richards due to change in ownership.
I will be presenting. I just spoke to the owner. They're on their way, but maybe like 5, at the most 10 minutes away. I'm going to be reading off of the staff report. In early 2023, current owners Philip and Courtney Wright sold the nightclub Whiskey Richards to applicants Colin Campbell and Jason Lee Jones. Philip and Courtney Wright held a nightclub dance permit from December 2007 to April 2023. Whiskey Richards consistently remained in good standing with their nightclub permit. In the past year, from April 2022 to April 6, 2023, the previous owner had 6 calls for service where officers were dispatched, 2 of which were criminal but were not caused by negligence of the Whiskey Richards staff. Philip and Courtney Wright currently hold a Type 48 ABC license for the premise. On March 8, 2023, an application for a nightclub dance permit was submitted to the Santa Barbara Police Department for the business at 435 State Street, DBA Whiskey Richards, by the owners of the business, Colin Campbell and Jason Jones. The applicants, Colin Campbell and Jason Jones, currently hold a temporary Type 48 ABC license.
Ms. Martinez, I hate to cut you off. The request of the commission was to move forward and not have the staff report read out in a public forum. Can you just move to the staff recommendation from the department specifically on the dance permit application?
Yes.
Great, thank you so much. And I apologize that the applicants aren't here yet for public comment, but we'll still open up the floor for public comment. Thank you.
The Santa Barbara Police Department recommends that the nightclub dance permit be issued to Colin Campbell and Jason Jones, owners of Whiskey Richards at 435 State Street, with the following conditions. Music and/or entertainment shall not be audible beyond 50 feet from the premise in any direction. Rear door must be kept closed but unlocked at all times during hours of dancing and may not be used for public entry or exit except in the case of emergency and to permit deliveries. Except in case of emergency, no patrons shall enter or exit the premise through the rear doors. No patrons may loiter in the rear alleyway. No live entertainment, dancing, or amplifying system or device shall be permitted on any patio or outdoor area. Televisions are permitted on patios and outdoor areas. Licensees shall police the area under their control once an hour to prevent the loitering of persons about the premise. Licensee is responsible for maintaining an orderly line of patrons awaiting entry into the premises. The queue of prospective patrons must not block passage of pedestrians on the public walkway, nor may it extend into any nearby street.
Do we have questions from commissioners?
No.
No.
And do we have public comment for this item?
No public comment on this item.
Okay. Do we have a motion for this item?
Yes, I would move that we approve the application consistent with the recommendation of the police department on this matter.
Wait, there's a person or something.
Did you have public comment? Sure. You have public comment, sure. Do you want to come to the podium?
I represent people in the alley, and I have a lot of comments I would like to make.
This is your,
I don't feel right doing it when they're not here.
this is the time to make public comment for this item. If you have a comment, I invite you to the podium so that your comment is heard.
Hear what I have to say. It seems unusual.
The meeting is recorded so that they can go back and review the meeting and your comments.
And you have 2 minutes.
I have 2 minutes? I represent all the owners on the business of the alley. Oh, my God. I'm Neil Ablett. I own the Ablett House. Ablett House is now a tourist attraction. We have people coming up and down that alley daily. I was down there this morning talking with the hotel. By the way, the hotel is the Hilton Hotel now. It's not the Holiday Inn Express. There's a lot of improvements being made. We want to welcome them, but we want a commitment that they will have security. We know what's happened in the past. The people this is just not fair. The Whiskey Richards in the past has not held up to. When I got the permit to build 20 years ago, I also got the request from City Council to organize the businesses in there and clean up that alley. I did it. I bought their loyalty. I built a wall. I built a fountain for the hotel. I paved the alley. I put in walkways. Anyway, we don't object to the dance permit, but we would like them to address and officially commit to the kind of security that will address the problems that come with the dance permit, which is increased population, noise, trash, parking. We don't object, but we want a commitment, and we want it not like the time that we're doing now. We have trash piled up there outside right now. They're doing their construction. Okay, we want to work with them, but let's move that daily. Let's not leave it there for months at a time. I've got 12 seconds left. We don't object. We welcome them with open arms. We're trying to improve and upgrade the area, but we need a commitment, and we do not. I got it originally, I didn't get it from them tonight.
Sir, if you're able to fill out a public comment slip with your contact information, hi, Barbara Anderson, I work for the city administrator, I can follow up with you. Let's have a conversation. There's other areas that we can, outside of the purview of the Fire and Police Commission, that we can work
I've done
on.
this before
Yeah.
with the commission, and we had a chance to exchange back and forth. This
Yeah.
is like city council.
Yeah, it is, yeah, the format of the meeting is, but please leave your contact information written out, and I can grab that from you, and I'll follow up. Thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public that would like to comment on this item? And sir, I invite you to come back if you'd like to talk further about not necessarily Whiskey Richards, but the concerns that you have in your area. If you would like to address the commission on that, we'd welcome you back for comment.
Pretty well handle it ourselves with cooperation, the application for that.
Do we have a second?
Chair, just may I interject, just to give the commission some options. So this is not a hearing that requires, I just want to provide some clarification. Usually when you have a hearing, that requires both parties to attend. Otherwise, you can't really have a hearing in absentia, that's what it's called. This is more of an approval process, so you can do that with the owner here, without the owner there. So there's no issues with that from a legal standpoint, for a due process standpoint at all, especially if there's an approval. So I just wanted to give the commission the options. They can have a motion now and decide to vote on it, or if they want, they can table it and bring it back later to the agenda if they want to hear from the owner. So it's the commission's decision what they want to do.
Well, having made the motion, I would find it hard to believe that the applicant would be unsatisfied with the motion that's been made, and so I see no reason to table it for them to come back later. I think we could go forward at this point in time, especially since the comments hopefully will be heard and considered by the city, and there'll be an opportunity to engage in that regard.
And just a point of comment, we will certainly engage with the public comment piece. I think there's a lot of things discussed in the application in terms of security and addressing the other issues in terms of the applicant in particular. So we will make sure that we sit and talk in terms of the public comments to address his concerns and make sure that everyone in the block continues to be good tenants. So we can have those conversations in the appropriate venue after the meeting.
Okay. So with those clarifications, renew the motion to approve the permit as it currently stands based on the recommendations of the police department.
Okay. Commissioner Herlinger? Second. We have a first and a second.
We have a motion moved by Commissioner Hill, seconded by Commissioner Herlinger to approve the dance permit application for Whiskey Richards. I will do a vote. And motion carries.
Very well, let's move on to item number 7. Would you mind reading that, Nicole?
Give me one moment. Item number 7, OIR Group Audit of Santa Barbara Police Department Policies, Procedures, and Practices.
I'm gonna get that tissue.
All right, good afternoon, Chair Rodriguez and Commissioners. I'm Barbara Anderson, a Senior Assistant to the City Administrator, and I'm joined this afternoon by Police Chief Kelly Gordon and Independent Police Monitor Expert Hassan Aiden of the Aiden Group LLC. We will be sharing a brief overview of the OIR Group audit of the Santa Barbara Police Department policies, procedures, and practices. As you know, the City Council approved conducting an audit of the Santa Barbara Police Department on June 6, 2022, as a key component of creating and implementing a new civilian oversight system for law enforcement. The OIR Group, an independent team of police practices experts, was the firm selected to conduct the audit due to their more than 2 decades of experience in oversight. The initiation of the audit by the city was uncommon because it was unlike other jurisdictions, in that we really sought to be proactive. So it was not in response to a critical incident or a publicized case of police misconduct. We really, again, are reiterating our commitment to transparency of the department's policies and procedures, as well as accountability to the highest of standards and best practices. The scope of work for the audit included review of the need for executive development and leadership training, the department's complaint process, use of force training and review, employee retention and recruiting, and general policy compliance. The audit was completed in March 2023 and included 31 recommendations for consideration. We'll be highlighting some of the observations shared by the OIR group in the final report, as well as a handful of the recommendations. We're happy to address any part of the report and answer any of your specific questions at the end of the presentation. So the first part of the scope of work was executive development and training. The city recognizes that changes in leadership over the last several years resulted in different approaches and styles that placed various emphasis on certain aspects of the department. With the transition from interim leadership to new leadership with Chief Gordon, there have already been visible and positive changes in organizational structure, department culture, and community engagement. We fully anticipated that low staffing levels and its impact on all aspects of the department would emerge as a cross-cutting theme throughout the report, and believe that the recommendations are in line with the significant time, attention, and resources that will be directed to recruiting and retaining officers. We also appreciate that the OIR group noted that officer wellness is promoted in positive ways, and department leadership laid the groundwork for community engagement that preceded the national movement for police reform. The audit recommends that the police department establish mechanisms to ensure that all its personnel and its supervisors and managers in particular engage in regular forms of professional development beyond mandatory state training requirements, with an eye toward increasing their own skill and expanding the agency's capabilities at the leadership level. This is one of the highest priorities for Chief Gordon and the department, and you will see resources being allocated specifically to meet these objectives in the department's recommended fiscal year 2024 budget. The OIR group also highlighted initiatives and programs that focus specifically on community-based field training and relationship building with local community leaders and organizations, and encourage the continued prioritization on these efforts. We wholeheartedly agree, and as the Commission has already experienced, community engagement programs like Coffee with a Cop are back from being paused during the COVID-19 pandemic, and youth programs like the Police Activities League continue to expand their reach and impact. The next area of the scope of work was the complaint process, both internal and external to the department. The audit specifically highlighted that the volume of external complaints received by the police department is generally low, and noted that the community is largely supportive of the department's work. OIR Group's review of actual department operations in the field reflected not only a high degree of competence by the department's personnel, but also a regard for service and respectful interactions with the public. As the Commission learned during your last meeting, the department has a detailed personnel complaint policy that is available online as part of the department's policy manual. It also includes a policy statement that the department takes seriously complaints about its services and the conduct of its officers. More recently, lieutenants from the respective officers' units of assignment have been incorporated into the assessment and decision-making on the discipline process, which is consistent with the notion of effective discipline as an organizational priority for which responsibility should be shared within the managerial team. As detailed in the audit report, supervisors have the primary responsibility for receiving complaints and determining whether they can be handled immediately or need further investigation. The intake process is also documented and tracked, which gives accountability to the intake supervisor's decision-making and allows for even low-level concerns to be monitored in case they become trends or warrant non-disciplinary interventions. OAR Group noted that the agency should take steps to ensure that the mechanics of investigations are clear to all participants and that status updates and timeline approximations are shared with subjects during the pendency of open cases. The audit highlighted that the police department was already in process of reviewing its procedures and is committed to going beyond the letter of the law in its written correspondence and potential follow-up conversations with interested complainants. Of the recommendations relating specifically to the complaint process, all of them were already being implemented by the Community Accountability Team and the Professional Standards Unit. The next component was use of force training and review. The audit highlighted the extraordinarily low number of use of force incidents and stated that overall, the department does not use force often, and when it does, the type of force is relatively minor. OAR Group reported that the overall numbers are not surprising, given we heard from several sources during our meetings in Santa Barbara that there's a culture that supports restraint and de-escalation of conflict rather than reliance on physically aggressive policing. In many cases, the OAR Group noted, officers display an impressive amount of patience in encounters with individuals in mental health crises. OAR Group noted that the officer reports of their actions are thorough and generally well-written, but there is room for improvement in the way department documents supervisor review of these incidents. These include specific reference to de-escalation tactics or strategies employed, either actions officers took in an attempt to de-escalate or when they could not make such efforts. The department has recently implemented a requirement that supervising sergeants are to complete a use of force memo that will provide a summary of the incident, document the interviews of the subject of the force and any witnesses, and make findings and recommendations about whether any remedial measures are needed. OAR Group also suggested adding a prompt for supervisors to recommend a commendation to recognize exemplary tactics and performance. The last component was specifically to employee retention and recruiting. The audit emphasized what we all know to be true, that law enforcement agencies across the country are facing unprecedented challenges in hiring and retaining officers, and that Santa Barbara is no exception. The department has seen a significant decline in the number of people applying to the agency over the last 6 years. The report also accurately captured that the challenges of recruiting for law enforcement jobs in general are exacerbated in Santa Barbara by the high cost of housing, coupled with the distance between Santa Barbara and more affordable cities. Despite these challenges, the department is excelling in recruiting more female officers. Among the current officer ranks, 27% are women. This is significantly more than the national average of 12%. Though OIR Group focused specifically on gender, we do want to acknowledge that the diversity of the department goes beyond gender lines. Chief Gordon continues to prioritize building a culture of inclusivity within the department and more accessibility in serving our broader community. The OIR Group uplifted and encouraged continuation of several proactive and innovative approaches that the department has implemented to address some of the difficulties in the current hiring environment. This includes helping to address the financial burden caused by the wait time between identifying an officer the agency wants to hire and the start of the next available training academy class. They've done this by employing newly hired but not yet trained recruits in temporary civilian assignments. The audit also recommended that recruitment strategies be updated to evolve with the changing nature of police work. The priorities of the department also align with this recommendation, and we anticipate sharing some of the new recruitment and retention strategies with the commission later this year. So now I'll turn it over to Chief Gordon to add her leadership insights and reflections on the audit, and specifically on the OIR Group's recommendations.
Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners. It's a pleasure. So, as you all know, I've been here, I think we're going on 7 months now. Wow. You know, when OIR came in, I think I had been here a whole 2 months and was already starting to make my own assessments as to some of the very same things that OIR looked at. specifically, as the new chief coming into the department, there are some particular things that are of particular interest, such as use of force, complaint process, hiring and retention. So many of the things that OIR was coming in, we were already doing our own evaluation of as they came in. So their recommendations are very much in alignment with many of the changes that we were already undergoing as a department, and I wouldn't even call them changes. I would call them more just updating some of our procedures. We did do use of force investigations, but they just weren't documented in a clear format. So as you know from the use of force presentation we did at last month, I think it was last month, it all starts to blend together. And we shared with you the new use of force format, including de-escalation. We're using a de-escalation flag to specifically identify incidents besides use of force incidents where de-escalation is used. So there are many things that we were already in the process of that align with the OIR report. We know we have a recruitment and retention challenges. We are actively working on it. In a little bit, you will also get our budget presentation, and recruitment and retention is one of our biggest priorities moving into the next year. We know we have particular challenges, some of the strategies, and we'll give a full presentation on that in the next couple of months, but we're having active conversations about how that changes, including doing a professionally made video, a new recruitment video, and other things that we're recruiting our hiring flyers, all the way to the language that we use in our descriptions as we put them out. So it's an overall effort. There are only so many things that we can control. We know that once we get folks in our doors, so to speak, they will appreciate the culture that we provide. Simple things like at the physical agility test, myself and Assistant Chief Kushner try to attend it. They're usually on Fridays, and we're both usually in the office, and we try to go. In fact, I think Assistant Chief Kushner did some push-ups with our, and I know I have a photo. But that's not something that you typically see with other departments, is that personal interaction from the very beginning. So those little personal touches are things that we are adding to our recruitment strategy. And, when it comes to retention, broadening our officer wellness program and other things, and looking what those opportunities are. And, it's going to take time. It takes effort. It takes resources, but those are all the things that we're committed to. But the big thing is we're committed to those that already work here as well, and making sure that, one of the topic is leadership training. We're going to bring in some outside very good executive leadership training for our management team in the next 2 months, and then next year we'll bring that to our sergeants. So we do have a need to send folks out to training, but we also have a need to do some building block training to really focus internally. My hope would be is in a few years that when I'm ready to retire, that we have a solid succession plan, and hopefully the next chief can be from internal. I really, truly hope that. And that's what we're building towards as part of our strategy in the future, and really building our team. We have a lot of phenomenal individuals, and I think what makes it even better is when we all work together as a team and we're not individuals. So that's what we're focusing on, is that team environment, building that team, and the community benefits from that. When we have a healthy culture internally, that translates into what we call, if you look at 21st century policing, or you look at procedural justice or constitutional policing, whichever terminology you look at, that it starts from within, and that translates into how we treat the community. So that is a big focus for us, and will continue to be. I am pleased with the report overall, because I think it highlights the good work and the good team of the department that has been doing phenomenal work despite significant challenges of staffing and pandemic, and we know how those challenges affect us. We're going to have some hard conversations, when we present the budget in a little while, because there's other hard decisions to be made. But like I said, I think it really, truly highlights the good work. It gives us a good foundation for the challenges that we know we have and the things that we're trying to address. But I also always know that you can't do everything at once, right? We have a saying, you bite off one elephant at a time. so that's part of this. You know, there's 31 recommendations. I think 19 of the 31 we already have addressed. You know, city council approved new equipment for us that includes new tasers. So that'll be implemented, I think, probably timeline-wise will be the first of the year that addresses one specific of the topics, because we're committed to not just going to the next level, but to the best level. And so that's why we chose the tasers that we chose. We didn't go with the model here. We went for the model here that will address a lot of the issues that were identified just in that one recommendation. So we're very cognizant and really trying to make good decisions based on that. You know, there's things that we're doing. We're already evaluating our evaluation system. It's already something that's in the process. In a couple months, when we do one of our other presentations, we'll bring in, you know, and you can see the matrix. And it's not really a matrix anymore. We've gotten away from a more of a 30-page checklist to a more meaningful evaluation is what we're moving towards. We haven't implemented it yet. And we'll share that with the commission so you can see how we're doing that. You know, we're going to continue, as we've always done, to include the community on all of our new hire panels, as we have done for the past, I think, 3 or 4 years. We are including community panels members on our promotional processes. We have an upcoming promotional process that will be once again including the community on. So we have no intention of not doing that. I will tell you that I appreciate OIR's insight on gender, but it's more my goal, not focusing on gender, to make sure that we are actually inclusive and equitable all the way across the board. If you look at our percentages in terms of everyone that we employ, our percentages actually align with the community very, very well. It's actually almost within a percentage or two of what the overall population of our community is what the makeup of our department is, which is, quite frankly, not the norm always. So we have a very inclusive and diversified department, and our goal is to make sure as we make promotions, as we make specialty assignments, that everyone has an equal opportunity to do so. And we're picking the best and most qualified, but everyone has the same and equal opportunity. And that's the important part, is that we're inclusive all the way across. You know, we've hired a great number of females in the last 5 years. You'll see them, you know, getting those specialty assignments as we move forward. We have 3 female detectives right now. We have a female in our community action team. So it's not that we don't. We haven't had a lot of specialty movement in the last 2 years because we don't have the staffing for it. So a lot of our specialty assignments are on hold. So I think you'll see a different turn as we move forward and start doing promotional assignments. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. I'm not focusing just on gender. I want to make sure that we're overall inclusive as a whole and not in just one particular place. You know, there is the 30 by 30 initiative that some departments are signing on to for, you know, by the year 2030, you know, getting 30% of their officers being female. Guess what? We're pretty much there. I think we're at 28% right now. And that, you know, take one person out of make one female hire or lose one male officer, and actually we would already be at that 30%. So I would hope that that percentage, you know, continues to rise, but I think we're positioned in a really good place in terms of moving forward and being the modern police department that we should be, and making sure that not only are we inclusive and equitable internally, but the same thing externally. You know, some of the improvements to the complaint process, you know, we're making multiple phone calls to our complainants. We're having them come in and review video with us if they wish. The letter they received isn't just a, you know, when the complaint is closed, isn't just a, hey, here you go, you know, it's closed. It actually gives explanation. It provides Commander Corbett's phone number. A lot of them reach out to her, but that's not the only time during the complaint process that they have heard from us. There are multiple times, and the ORI report highlights that we actually go well beyond what is written in law and policy and do way beyond, and we're going to continue to do so. And we're also doing the same thing internally in terms of how we communicate with our employees that have been the named as the subject of a complaint, because it is very stressful to be named in the subject of a complaint. And, you know, as you can see from the OIR report, some of these are individuals, and, you know, we take all complaints. So no matter what, it doesn't matter who makes a complaint or what is alleged, we take them seriously. But I'm sure you can appreciate as an officer getting served that you're the subject of a complaint is a big deal. So we want to make sure that we are addressing all their fears and concerns that go with that, because there's SB2 and all these other things that go with that now. So like I said, it's about being equitable with our community, but it's also about being equitable with our officers and how we treat them, and making sure that notifications internally and externally go beyond what is written, and making sure that we're providing appropriate explanations. So we're going way beyond what is just written in the OIR report in terms of how we're communicating with the complainants and the public, but the same thing internally. So I think we're really well positioned. We are 100% committed to looking at all the recommendations and seeing how we can, you know, institute them. Some of them are things that we're already doing. A majority of them are things that we're already doing. You know, there's a couple that I think, you know, nuance-wise, you know, there's one about how we can maybe possibly before a recruit starts the academy, you know, have them work with community organizations. For us, that time before they enter the academy is really important to set them up for success in the academy. And we are shortening that time because now we're using and looking at multiple academies. We're not waiting now for Ventura County to be our only resource for academies. We have such a hiring need that we're looking at using different academies. So we're shortening that time. I can tell you our pre-academy is very intentional about what they're exposed to and what they do. It's, you know, it's things like drilling and PT, and which is the physical piece of it, getting them ready so they can be the most successful. You know, we've added a family night to have all the recruits' families come in and get to know us and all of the other families as a group before they start the academy. So all those pieces are super important. It's not the community piece is not, but that piece is more important for when they get out of the academy. And we actually do a whole week where they spend in post-academy with different members of the community. So it's not that we ignore the piece, we do it at the end. So those are just some nuances in terms of, I think, what meets the best needs of the department. So we respect all the recommendations, we're looking at them. There's still a couple that we're looking to see how we can accommodate. You know, there's a recommendation about the pointing of the firearm that is actually you know, already addressed in our policy, as far as, and it's actually by case law too, you know, pointing a firearm and by law is a use of force, but it's how we document that. If we did a use of force report, a full investigation every time an officer drew their firearm, that would be and Mr. Aiden can speak to that, you know, at a national level with that would not be what's in the best interest of the department or the community. But yes, it is a use of force, and yes, we do have a way in which we document that, and we're just looking to see how we can track it more effectively. We're just not sure what that will look like at this point. We have to make sure that we don't create a process that is overly burdensome and cumbersome and has unintended consequences. So we're looking at each of the recommendations seriously and how we move forward. We appreciate the Fire and Police Commission's input, but overall, I'm extremely pleased with the results and how everyone's reacting to this, so.
Thank you, Chief. I'm also going to turn it to Mr. Aiden. He's also carefully reviewed that audit report and has already provided really valuable perspective to support the Santa Barbara Police Department, the City Administrator's Office, in our commitment to be proactive, as well as evolving to meet the new standards and expectations of the community. So a brief introduction from Mr. Aiden. Yeah, that would be great.
Good afternoon. Traveled all day to be here from Central. I was in Kansas City on a trial this week, but I'm thrilled to be here. And just want to give you a little background on my experience and the work that I do across the country and internationally. 3 decades in active policing. I'm a retired police chief spanning 2 states, 2 police departments, Alexandria, Virginia, Greenville, North Carolina. After I retired, I was appointed Director of the International Association of Chiefs of Police. The IACP is the largest police executive association in the world. We provided technical assistance to departments worldwide, research and evaluation of programs worldwide. I gained a lot of experience in the brief time that I was there, because the entire time that I was there was contingent on me starting my firm. And the IACP board knew that. So I was a placeholder for about a year. It was amazing. It was a great experience. But then I launched into starting my firm. And my firm, the Aiden Group, I partner with a lot of different firms. I am very familiar with OIR and the work that they do. But our firm, what we do primarily is we do it through 3 distinct lines of work. We help departments strike the balance between constitutional policing and community engagement and inclusion and effective crime fighting. All 3 of those things must be present for a community to respect and work with the police. If one gets off skew, you've got issues that you've got to address immediately. So that's the lens with which we go into all of our lines of work. And those lines of work are primarily, I and my team, we work for federal judges, and we oversee cities that are under consent decrees. Those cities are, and were, some of them are out of the consent decrees, Seattle, Cleveland, Baltimore, Chicago, and then we're affiliated with some other monitoring teams where we don't directly report to the judge. That work requires us to very deeply assess, evaluate, and provide feedback to the court and to the judge on compliance. So it is a version of this where you have recommendations, except those are court-ordered, and the department has to comply. And there have to be proofs of compliance through assessments and other ways. The second line of work is we provide counsel to state attorney general's offices. Even here in California with the California Department of Justice, we work on pattern and practice investigations on police departments that may be experiencing patterns and practices of unlawful, unconstitutional behavior. We do that in multiple states. That is a line of work that it's a difficult line of work, particularly, and I don't mean the task of investigating, but trying to get attorneys that are not familiar with how to investigate and navigate police departments sort of into that mindset. It's a very different kind of investigation than other sort of consumer and other investigations they might be involved with. And the third line of work is one that I personally prefer. It's my favorite. It's the one where police departments and cities such as Santa Barbara want to voluntarily get better and want to voluntarily learn and really just get on the path of a continuous improvement. They could already be at a very high level. Many of them are. Santa Barbara certainly is. But the critical self-assessment piece is something that has to be learned. And it's often done through sort of an independent person that is able to work with the department on getting there. And those, the departments run the gamut from major city departments to very small, rural, tribal departments. And that's essentially our line of work. So I'm thrilled to be working with the city. It's a beautiful place. I came from, is anyone here from Kansas City? Came from a place that was slightly different than this. But I'm truly excited to work with the team here. With regard to the OIR report, I'll start, I'm going to be very brief in my observations. I've done a very deep dive and have worked with the team on feedback. I thought it was generally a positive report. And if you've read OIR reports, they're not all that way. So they don't just say, you're good, or you're going in the right direction. They call it as they see it. And I think that they were accurate in the way that they portrayed their observations in the report. The second piece is, it was clear to me that many of their recommendations were already underway. I thought that the chief, as soon as she came in, as she said, there are areas that if you come in as a new chief, you're looking at them from day one. And those are areas that I consider chief killers. If you don't get those right away, it'll be a short-lived tenure. And that's use of force, accountability measures, and some of the special investigative units, such as vice and narcotics, the drug work. The chief was all over that. The recommendations, when they were drafted, most of them were in process. Others had been and are now already implemented. So I think that that's a great start. I think this report is a start. It's a start. Continuous improvement goes much deeper, and continuous improvement goes at some aspects that aren't covered in that report, and that's department culture. And department culture, heard this many years ago, eats policy for lunch. So that is the focus, and that's the hard work, getting these implemented, and then taking a deeper dive, looking at the culture of the Santa Barbara Police Department. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aden. I appreciate that. And so we are all here, available for your questions, inquiries, comments, and areas that, again, can be brought up and highlighted as areas that you want to make sure that we prioritize moving forward as a commission as well. So thank you for your time today.
Questions from the commission? Commissioner Hill?
Well, I'll start because I know the least. So, but I wanted to focus on, first off, I've got to make a general comment. To me, the reading of the OIR report was just really impressive of the condition and quality and performance of the police department, and particularly the change in the environment that seems to be underway with the new chief, and the way in which that will, I believe, significantly influence the, I love the idea of culture trumps policy, but the way in which the culture is already probably becoming more holistic and responsive. I had a particular question because I don't understand it very well, and it's on the audit recommendation number 22, which is that the department should revise its use of force policy to state that the pointing of a firearm at an individual is a reportable use of force. And the response was it's for further review, and you've already mentioned, Chief Gordon's already mentioned some of what's involved there, but I'm not sure I'm clear about it. But he said the department is currently exploring nationally accepted practices in tracking the pointing of firearms outside of the use of force reporting system. Could you help me understand why we're not going to use the use of force reporting system that's currently in place, particularly since you just mentioned that the supervising sergeants are now doing a use of force review as part of their process?
So not every use of force requires a use of force report. We have certain things that require a separate investigation. A pointed of a firearm is a use of force. It's in our policy. There is guidelines to go with it.
Okay.
But I want you to let me see if I can boil it down for you. So help you understand. So let's say we conduct what we would call a felony traffic stop. So let's say we know that there's someone that is in this vehicle that's likely to be armed and dangerous. So we do what we call a high-risk stop. Mm-hmm. Okay, as part of that high-risk stop, you're going to see probably at least 4 firearms pointed at the vehicle while we're extracting all of the folks that are inside the vehicle. That would then require us to do an entire use of force investigation on everyone that pulled their firearms. So when we did our use of force reporting, you know, that entire investigation that we showed you, we would do that every time. That's an exhaustive amount of work, where the fact that a high-risk traffic stop is done is already documented in terms of the report that goes with it. Like, there's no injuries that go with that. So typically, a use of force report, that a separate investigation we gave you, would come because there's injuries, there's other things that have happened. So, you know, if someone complains of pain or anything like that, that would result in that use of force report. But if someone, anytime we put our hands on someone, like if we use a control hold, right? That's a use of force, but does that mean that we do an entire use of force investigation? Does that
Okay.
make sense? Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, let me understand a little better. So let's take a scenario like the one you gave, where there are weapons pointed at the people leaving the car for good reason,
Yes,
but there is no injury that results from it. That
Yes.
is reported and captured where?
it's reported and captured in the actual incident report.
So if we were to want to collect the frequency with which weapons were pointed, but no injury resulted from it other than whatever psychological claim someone was to make, how would that all be collected?
Which is what the piece we're trying to figure out. So we know that it's being documented and it exists. We're just trying to figure out how we track it. And does that make sense?
Yeah, and so what I'm understanding is that what you're saying is it doesn't necessarily imply a need for an investigation.
Correct.
But it may, if it became systemic either with respect to a particular officer or a particular circumstance, be something that required exploration.
Correct. So we're just trying to figure out, and Mr. Aiden can speak to what that looks like at a national level and from his work. But we're trying to figure out how we best capture that information and how we can track it. We haven't figured that out yet. We're early in this process and trying to figure out how we can track that piece of it appropriately. But we don't know what that is yet. I do know that it's not going to be in terms of documenting that in terms of a full use of force investigation report, because that is a very cumbersome process that this does not necessitate. Now, if there's a officer-involved shooting or something else that results, that's separate. But the use of force of a pointing of a firearm without injury or anything else happening, we have to figure out how we're going to capture that piece.
Do you have any sense of the frequency of that occurrence?
I don't have a sense of that frequency because there are other exceptions. And like I said, Mr. Aiden can speak to this because sometimes that can be when we're clearing a house, right? You draw your firearm to do a building search. We have to figure out how we're going to capture that and what that metric is. And I don't have the answer for what that's going to be as we move forward. Because like I said, there are other things that we want to make sure that officers aren't randomly pulling out their firearm and using force. You know, I can tell you, I think we'd end up with a series of complaints and other things that would result, but we just have to figure out what metric we're going to use and how we're going to track that effectively. And like I said, I think Mr. Aiden can speak to what that looks like on a national level.
Before I hear about it on a national level, just one last step on this. If we were to look at last year, and we were asked the question, how frequently was a firearm pointed at a civilian without any other physical force or injury involved in the circumstance, how would we find the answer to that question?
We couldn't find the answer to that question.
Okay, thank you.
We haven't tracked it that way up to this point. So that's why this would be a new tracking mechanism that we don't currently have. We know that it's documented and that it exists, but that would mean going through 45,000 reports.
Exactly. Okay, thank you.
So I think that recommendation stems from investigations that are into departments that are actually under a pattern and practice investigation. In every single consent decree, whether it's state or federal, that recommendation is in there. And I believe that's where OIR got that from, and departments are mandated to actually do a full-blown investigation. And that's because of their pattern and practice of using force and using excessive force and using inappropriate force. So that's one bucket. The most common with departments that are not in such a condition is to track it, A, to have it in policy, B, to track it somehow and be able to actually do exactly what you said, to be able to say, we've had this number of this type of force. And that's easy. That's a data issue. But then there's another reason to track it, and that is if you have, it's to also identify officers that are overusing the pointing of firearms. So somehow to tie that into some sort of an intervention and a look, maybe it's nothing. Maybe they just are running into a disproportionate amount of situations that require that. But evaluating officers, apples to apples, if you work midnights, looking at officers that work midnights, because those situations are going to be somewhat different than officers that work days. But to have some way of telling whether an intervention is necessary, whether it be a deeper look at the use of forces or training, there are a lot of interventions that can occur. So capturing it, being able to identify the officers, and being able to use that data for any other requests that come in, I think it's very important, and it's underway.
Okay, thank you. That helps me a lot.
I think this, that particular recommendation is quite compelling, so it would be helpful if we can add that to future agenda when you figure out the best way of recording that type of use of force to educate us on that.
Absolutely, and I mean, it's one of the items that we can clearly, as we work through this, include in our yearly report. So it's certainly something that we can report back on.
Any other questions, Commissioner Hill?
No, that's enough for me.
Okay. Commissioner Herlinger?
I just got a question, Mr. Edding. Okay. Are you finished? Are you going to continue to work with us, or what is the nature of the relationship?
Commissioner Herlinger, I can answer that. We are actually going to be extending the timeline of his contract. The engagement so far has been regular check-ins, weekly check-ins with our team, reviewing critical materials like the audit, advising on that, providing feedback. Any component of the civilian oversight system that we are in process of implementing, he's been advising on that. So we've actually been under budget, so we're able to extend. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Dozer?
Yeah, just to follow up on our discussion about this one recommendation regarding the pointing of the firearm. Obviously, tracking use of force is extremely, extremely important. And OIR, in their analysis, relied upon federal case law. And I'd be curious to know what that case law is and where it came from, because obviously it's not a Supreme Court case, because I'm sure Mr. Janaka would have said that. And I'm just curious because I think that would help inform us of a better picture, because every time an officer uses a firearm or even points it or has it in a low-ready position, the circumstances are so important and so unique for each circumstance. And I think case law would be helpful to know as well.
So I don't mean to, I'm going to speak directly from our policy. I don't mean to take away our attorney's thunder, because he may give you specific case law, but there is a government code.
Mm-hmm.
It's Government Code 7286B that talks about how officers should carefully evaluate each tactical situation and use sound discretion when drawing a firearm in public by considering the following guidelines. So it is a government code section that is specifically in our policy manual. So if you look at the policy manual, you were all provided our use of force policy when we did the use of force. So if you make yourself a note, if you look at page 7 of the use of force policy, you can see exactly what's in our policy regarding the display of firearms. It's section 300.4.2. So if you go back to your materials, and if you need it resent, we can always resend it as well. But that is the government code section that we specifically use in our policy manual, and the attorneys in the room, and Mr. Aiden can speak to if there's a case law too.
No, I was just curious. I mean, it seems like that would be, why wouldn't it be cited here then by OIR?
It's also a seizure under the Fourth Amendment.
Sure.
And I think that that's where it flows down, because there's no actual use of force, but it is a seizure, which is considered to be one of the most intrusive acts of government, and therefore has to be handled.
Yes, Chair Rodriguez, Commissioner Dozier. That was an issue that was brought up in a case I had where someone was trying to allege that the pointing of a taser was considered use of force. And in that research and having to deal with that issue, there's no reported case that says the pointing of a taser is considered use of force. There were 2 circuit decisions in the Midwest that actually said the opposite, that would not be considered. There is, I believe, that I'll have to triple check on this. I know the use of taser in terms of a firearm. I don't believe there is a Ninth Circuit decision at all that would say that it's a considered use of force. That would have to something to confirm for sure. So it's very rare for it to be considered. Usually there has to be some act of violence or discharge of a weapon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hill?
It's just a follow-up. I understand the policy captured in the government code that's part of the policy of the department. The question is, how do we know, or how does the department know in the operations whether or not circumstances have occurred which are violations of that policy?
But here's what I want to point out. So any incident report is reviewed and approved by a supervisor.
Okay.
So it's not that there's no oversight, because there is oversight of it. So it's not that officers are pointing their firearms at individuals and there's no recorded documentation. It's that we just don't track that number specifically at this point. But an incident report is always approved by a supervisor. So there's always levels of review
Perfect.
that go with that. Same thing like if we have a SWAT operation, and there's the pointing of a firearm during a SWAT operation, that entire SWAT operation is debriefed in written documentation. And they actually refer to that in the OIR report when they talk about our use of force, how well we do that when it comes to SWAT. So it's not that the department doesn't want to capture or has an unwillingness, we just haven't specifically captured that statistic, in the past. And it's not that there's no oversight of it, because there's actually quite a bit of oversight of it. It's just how we specifically capture that particular statistic.
Thank you. That helps a lot. Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I just want to commend you for this report. I thought it was I'm sorry, Commissioner Dozier.
Yeah, I'm hoping that you guys can follow up on, it's number 24, and it's about using the tasers in, I think it's the drive stun mode, but you had addressed that you'd gotten some new tasers that might address
So,
this.
yes, so their recommendation is not to use it in dry stun mode. There's various schools of thought regarding that. I've seen it used very effectively. In fact, in their report, they actually referred to how it was used very effectively.
Yes, they did.
In a particular incident. So I'm not going to debate the recommendation, but what we are is we know we need to purchase new tasers. I forget what we're at now, but there's a Taser 7 and then there's a Taser 10. The Taser 10 is what we are purchasing and what was approved by council this week. That actually gives us the ability to go from 25 feet to 45 feet. So it increases our distance and gives us more opportunity to de-escalate safely from a safer distance than you can at 25 feet. So that new capability has multiple, I don't like to use the word multiple shots, but multiple darts. So it allows for an additional discharge of more darts versus one cartridge. And then right now you're one and done unless you change your cartridge. And so it does not have dry stun mode. So this will be This will not be even available to our officers once we move to the new tasers. Like I said, that will probably be January, and all officers will go through new training on the new tasers. So this will be not just our normal remedial training, we will do specific training for the new tasers. What I don't want to do is suddenly make a change to a policy right in this moment that then we're going to make another change because everyone have to be retrained. And that's where you start getting yourself, I think, in my opinion, into trouble because that's when officers, muscle memory and all the things that we practice, then that becomes more difficult for them. So we will make this change when we switch tasers. We actually only use the taser 6 times the entire 2022. We don't have a high usage of the taser. And like I said, the case that they pointed out in the OIR report, we actually used it in dry stone mode very effectively. So I think there's different perspectives on that, but we're going to make that change to policy when we go to the new tasers. Like I said, we'll do the purchase order, but I think it's going to be probably January before we take delivery of them, and then we'll train the entire department on the new taser.
Do you have any concern of not having a taser that you could use drive stun?
I think the
mode?
new technology in the 10 outweighs not having that ability. The new 45 feet and the other things and the new technology that it provides, I think outweighs not having that dry stun mode.
Mhm.
So I think when you look at the totality of it, I'm very confident in what that new taser will provide for us. Like I said, because the difference between 25 and 45 feet is a huge difference for us. The multiple darts without reloading cartridges. So there are some significant advantages that allow us to do additional de-escalation and other things that we can't do now. So that's why, that's where we're moving to, is going to be the newest technology.
Thank you.
So I was really happy to read this report that half of the recommendations were already implemented and the other half are in the process of being implemented. And I think that says a lot about your experience, Chief, with your experience on post, with your experience being a chief in other departments. So I just want to thank you for coming in and seeing areas of improvement and acting on that right away. I also really appreciate the language of de-escalation. Coming from a community, growing up in a community where we feared police officers, we heard a lot about the harm that police officers caused. So I think it's important for vulnerable communities or communities that have a history of a negative interaction with police to hear about the de-escalation that takes place and how that is more common than use of force. So thank you for highlighting that language. I wanted to ask a question about the, well, first, I want to commend that this department only had 2 officer-involved shootings in 10 years. That is wonderful to hear, considering the enormous amount of national news that we hear about police-involved shooting. I am curious about the 2019 one. That seemed to, I think I know what it is, but that seemed to kind of, I don't think many people heard about it. Can you share more about that one?
No, I cannot.
Because it's a closed case?
No, because
or-
I wasn't here for that. So I don't want to speak to an investigation that I was not part of.
Okay.
I don't want to also put any of my staff on the spot without having, I don't want to put them on the spot assuming that they know. They were all in different positions at the time. So I cannot answer that question. The city attorney may be or may not be able to, but like I said, I don't have information on that 2019 shooting.
And Chair Rodriguez, we can absolutely discuss talking about it at a future commission meeting.
Okay. Also, the report didn't mention that complaints can also be filed at City Hall, the city administrator's office, and this commission. So for the public, for the public's knowledge, that you don't have to just file a complaint at the police report. I think that's all of my questions. Most of them were already answered, so thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you. Great to have you here. Any other questions from the commission? Okay, we can move to the next item.
Chair Rodriguez, we're just going to take a brief 5-minute break, stretch, water, hydrate, and prepare for the rest of the presentations. All right, so we will be back at 4:15.
Perfect, thank you.
Meeting is now back in session, and we are moving on to item number 8. Would you mind reading that?
Yes, item number 8, fiscal year 2024 budget review for the Santa Barbara Police Department.
All right, so now we're going to move on to budget. All right, let's see here. Okay, so we're going to break it into 5 parts. I know up until now, we haven't really gone over our organization of our department, so we're going to just give a brief overview of the department. We're not going to get into fine detail in terms of the number of officers that work particular units, but we're just going to give you a high-level overview. Lori's going to cover revenue and expenses. Lori is our business manager, so you will get familiar with Lori. She's the one, so to speak, handles the books and is our budget wizard, and I could not do it without her, so I greatly appreciate her. Then we're going to talk about our budget adjustments, which is where the difficult conversation will occur, and we'll talk about the decision-making with that. And then we're going to talk about core. And you're going to get to hear about the city's Vision 2030 and how we've gone from what used to be called P3. So those of you who are familiar with the prior budgets, it used to be called P3s, and we've gone to a much simplified process in terms of the city to new core goals. So that will be a change if, like I said, if you've looked at prior budgets from what you've seen in the past. So with that, I know it's a little small to see, but this gives you an overall just organizational chart of the entire department. You'll see you'll have the chief's office at the top, the community accountability, which is Commander Corbett, a professional standards sergeant, and then our public information officer, all are part of that. We then have an investigations and strategic operations division, which is where our investigations sits, as well as training and recruitment. All the way on the right, you're going to see we have field operations and communications. So that's where our patrol, traffic, community action team, our patrol teams, special enforcement teams sit. In the center of the diagram, you're going to see our internal operations division. That's where IT, records, business, and in the future, animal control will sit. That internal operations division currently is overseen by the investigation strategic operations assistant chief, but we are in the process of hiring an administrative professional staff that will actually oversee our professional staff, which creates a lot of positive growth opportunities and appropriate, so to speak, chain of command for a lot of our professional staff. So that is something that we are currently in the process of working towards hiring towards. So I think I probably already covered those in that brief overview. I think we covered all of those. We covered those. And training and recruitment. I do want to, can we go back real quick to training and recruitment? The one more. Just so you know, training and recruitment also includes officer wellness, our special events, deemed approved, and range and equipment. So there's multiple things that are housed in that area. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lori to talk about revenues.
Good afternoon, Lori Peterson, the business manager at the police department. I'm going to go through the revenues and expenditures for the proposed budgets for 24 and 25. The revenues, when you look at them, we have had to do some adjustments. We've continued to feel the impacts in our departmental revenues from COVID, mostly in the parking citation fee area. When we didn't issue citations, there were no citations to collect on, and so that we anticipate that for probably by 2025 that revenue will have filled that gap of 2 years that we're filling that impact from. So there was an adjustment made to reflect that. We've also had some internal structural changes on how we pay for street sweeping and such, so you'll notice that on shifting of where the revenue's coming in. And then in service charges, We made some fee schedule changes for various things. They'll include alarms. So the alarm permit fee went up from $40 to $50. We're also increasing the expense related to false alarm responses. And most significantly for those people who fail to register their alarm systems and continue to have multiple false alarms without registering still. So because that's such a draw on staff and pulls them away from being able to respond to important situations, that's where that penalty has been set for the coming years. We also looked at, we've added in the deemed approved, which was actually added last year. We have fees in there for the carry conceal, which is a new thing that we've had to take on as a department. So we've found related fees to cover that expense. And then special events, we made staffing reimbursement rates. We just reflected the cost of what that is now. And then in parking citations, all parking citations went up by $5 a piece. And then we actually raised handicap violations to $400 from $353. Again, a significant violation that needs to be addressed and discourage people from doing that kind of behavior. So those are the changes that we've made. You can see that originally our 2023 budget was budgeted at about $4 million. It dips down for 2024 just because, again, even though we've made some rate changes, we're still experiencing some drop in our revenue. And then by 2025, we anticipate we will also have more staffing available in that area of issuing parking citations, et cetera. So we'll be finally recovering at that point for our revenues. Any questions for that one, or?
We'll save it.
Okay. On the expenditure, pardon me.
I believe we have a question. Commissioner Herlinger?
I just have a question on the organization chart. Is those budgeted positions or are those filled? You have the 142 and 68. Are those, is that the budget or is that the
I
filled
think maybe what would
positions?
be most helpful is if we do all the questions at the end, because we're going to address some staffing issues when we talk about
Okay, that's fine.
our
We were asked
expenditure
for questions,
changes.
so, okay.
Yeah.
But I'll
So-
wait at the end.
So Lori got ahead of us, but I think it would be most helpful perspective-wise if, once we get to that piece, because I'm going to give you more explanation.
Okay, thank you.
On the expenditure side, our budget is mostly in salaries and benefits. So those costs are going up over the next couple of years. In the supplies and services area, we've also experienced some significant increases for things like our county animal shelter contract, rental lease agreements, and then also some professional services that were required for like backgrounds and those kinds of things. So we've experienced some increases in that area as well. And then on the special project side, that is a fluid area where as projects are developed, they are then brought to council if there's some additional activity. At this point, we don't have any special projects, so they're not budgeted on that. And then the other part, the department also does have some special funds where we receive revenues. The grants, we don't usually budget until such time as we receive them, so the Office of Traffic Safety is an area where we receive monies, but is not in the budget at this point. We also have our COPS funding, which is an annual amount that we receive, and Traffic Safety Fund. So those are some additional revenues that come in to cover salary and benefit costs. And that is the completion of our budget presentation. Yours.
So, in the next slide, this is where we're going to talk about budget adjustments. This is where we're going to talk about exactly your question, Commissioner Herlinger, and I'm sure probably several other questions. So currently, our current full-time equivalent staffing is 210 if we filled all of our positions. And that includes 102 sworn staff positions and 68 professional staff for a total of 210. So we, as a department, were asked or directed to cut a total of $2.5 million from our budget for '24 and '25. That means, as you can see, $1 million in '24 and then $1.5 million for '25. If you can go back a slide for me, please. As you can see by the expenditure list, most of our budget is pre-allocated for us. We don't have a big services and supplies budget. Most of our budget is salaries, benefit, and allocated cost. Like the increase that you see in allocated costs, that's for such things that we have no control over. It's like what we pay to HR, what we pay to city IT, what we pay to public works. Those are all fixed costs that are done by a city allocation method that we don't have control over. So when it comes to, the salary and benefits, clearly those are set by MOUs. And then you have the allocated costs, and you can see, for '24, it's only $3.6 million at services and supplies. And like Lori referred to, most of those are already contractually set. So if you break that down, you can actually go into OpenGov on the city's website and see the breakdown of all these. We didn't want to bore you to death with the actual breakdown of all the individual categories. But as we talked about in the OIR report, we have to focus on the training, the recruitment, the retention of our current employees, and adding our employees. So in order to make go ahead and come back, $2.5 million worth of budget cuts, we had to make some really hard decisions on what we were going to cut. We had to decide what we were going to eliminate. We don't have programs to eliminate. We don't. We haven't even brought our Explorer program back. We have a significant staffing shortage, which we've discussed. Currently, as of today's date, it actually just went up by one, so as soon as we did the numbers, I now know I have an officer leaving for another department because it requires him to no longer commute an hour. So I have to respect that fact, and he's not going to take a pay cut by doing that. And he gains the time back with his family. So those are the realities of what we are facing here. And in last year's budget, before I got here, we held 3 positions for 6 police tech positions, which we're going to continue to hold. So those aren't reflected here because those are already done. But at this moment, we have, the way in which we do it, we actually have 24 vacancies for sworn positions. So that's a big number. So when you see what our recommendations are in terms of the budget, with what we had to cut, we had to make hard decisions. We can't cut training. We don't have a big training budget to start, but as in the OIR recommendations, we have to allocate that money in order to be and to take care of those that we have to continue to provide that training. Let's just say we cut all of our services and supplies and took it all out of that $3.6 million. We all know that you can't run the department and pay for all the services and supplies with $1 million for a department our size. There's not that kind of thing. Those are contractual services that we have. So that left us to look at internally what we can do. So we had to make some very difficult decisions. One of those decisions was we have chosen to eliminate a professional staff position, which is our range master position, because we can't afford to cut any of our external customer service positions. If we cut a parking control officer, that affects our services to the community. By cutting the range master position, that puts the burden on us internally to absorb that function, which will be then absorbed by sworn staff. We'll have a sergeant oversee the range program. We'll have a cadre. We have a cadre of about 10. We'll have to increase that size, and that has to do with qualifications and making sure that we have the ability to do all of our firearms training. So that's going to be transferred to a variety of folks individually. It is a position that has been cut before. It was cut back in 2010. It is a valuable position, but it is one that we are going to observe internally because, like I said, at this point, we can't afford to cut any other external services to the community. We are, doing our best to provide public safety at the level at which we can, but we can't cut any more external services to the community. So with that, we're eliminating hourly hours and records. We eliminated the range master position. We're holding a specialty sergeant position. So we won't be filling a sergeant's position. We've held that open, knowing that we had to make these cuts. We're holding 2 more specialty officer positions. And we can't hold positions at the recruit entry level because we have to fill patrol. So these are assignments such as motor officers, or our special enforcement team, or some of our officers from the community action team. And yes, does it affect our community? Absolutely. Does it have effect on how we recruit and retain? Of course, because there's less opportunity for specialty assignments. For the 25-year, fiscal year 25, those positions are being held plus 2 additional specialty officer positions. Like I said, these are all difficult decisions. Ultimately, where this leaves us is our goal will be in the next year to recruit and hire 16 officers, to bring us up to the level of then where we come back to council and ask to be able to fill those officer positions. But like I said, none of this, is easy. These are difficult positions and decisions to make, but we didn't feel we could cut external customer service. It's something that we're going to bear internally with the cut of the range master position and those specialty assignments. Like I said, we're not calling a name to each of those at this point. We could. I'm giving you some examples, but we also know that that could change with the needs of the community. So it may be right now we say that would be a traffic officer position, but we get 6 months down on the road and we realize, holy cow, we have to have that position, so we're going to hold a position for the special enforcement team instead. So there is impact to the community, absolutely. There's impact to the department. But when you're talking about a $2.5 million cut from a $56 million budget, no matter what you're going to do, this is going to be difficult. And like I said, the only piece of the budget that we have control over is that $3.6 million in terms of, other than salary, benefits, and pre-allocated costs. And those are contractual. Most of those we actually don't have control over, for such things as, one of that is the lease of the annex. That's one of those things we can't cut and that we have to pay, and increases 5% or 3% every year. And we are committed to making sure that we are going to provide the quality of training and the training that we need, so we're not going to cut the training budget. We have to continue to provide for the officers that work for us and continue to be the best that we can be. So despite these challenges, there's opportunities, and that's where we're going to focus our efforts. Can you go to the next slide, please? So with that, I want to kind of give you a brief picture on CORE. And so this is a citywide initiative, and this is part of Vision 2030. So the objective of CORE is city outcomes reaching for excellence, and they are looking to provide a more streamlined and meaningful approach to successful management. We have to develop each one goal for each of the pillars, and the pillars, as you can see, are a thriving workforce, organizational optimization, and innovation. So you can see how they all work together, and then the big one is the fiscal sustainability. So each of our performance measures have to speak to each of the goal, and like I said, working towards that Vision 2030, and what the entire city and every department is being tasked with. And we included the question and the piece on the bottom for you because we want you to be able to know where to go and get more information on Vision 2030 and CORE. Because when you hear Chief Mills talk, this is also where you're going to be hearing the same CORE. You can go to the next slide. Department priorities, we've talked about it. Recruitment in the local community. We're doing a lot of that. We'll do a full recruitment presentation for everyone, but we're working with SBCC to really, we're going to do an internship, and we're doing other things. We're doing a how to get ready to become a dispatcher program with them. We're really partnering with them on a lot of things. We're doing a lot more local recruitment events and changing some of those things. We're going to do a new recruitment video, but we're really focusing on the local community. Alignment of departmental resources, when you look at what we're talking about and looking at the organizational chart, there's not names and specific numbers of commanders in certain places because we're still moving the pieces. You know, I've only been here 7 months, and we're still moving some of those pieces to figure out what is going to fit as we move towards the future. You know, what we did 10 years ago is not necessarily what we need now, just so we have to vision for the future, and that's what we're trying to do, is what's going to be sustainable for us in the future. Part of that Vision 2030, we're also looking at where all those pieces move. And lastly, invest in employee personal and professional growth. That has to do with officer wellness. We did get a grant that we're going to use, which is $82,000 grant, and what we can use it for. All departments got money, it depended on size. But for officer wellness, we're looking at a yoga program, we're looking at a bunch of different things that we can bring in. We're looking at a decompression room and some other things and different innovative ideas to look at and how we can better take care of our personnel. We're doing debriefs, we're doing a lot more things to make sure that we're providing for officer wellness. We're talking about possibly doing annual mental health check-ins and really broadening our look on what that means. And then, like we talked about, the professional growth piece. You know, right now, post requires 24 hours every 2 years. We want to make sure we're going well beyond that in the training that we're providing our officers. So these are the core goals. If you look at it, all the categories, we have 2 for each. It all goes to speak to what we just talked about. I'm not going to go through each of them individually, but if you look, you know, even if you look at the last one, support personnel and professional development of all members of the police department, continue to prepare competent and compassionate leaders. So we're going to have all sergeant commanders attend use of force investigation training. I just talked about it, the annual mental health check-ins. We're working on moving our field operations to an 11-hour patrol schedule plan come July, which is departmental driven. It's not been driven by the top, it's actually been driven from the bottom up. I'm excited to see how that helps staffing and actually morale and gives more shift options. Design a robust recruitment plan. We're going to do some stuff about our external reporting tools, and then do an incident response test in terms of disaster recovery and when it comes to our IT systems. So that's a high level, quick snapshot, but they're all based around those 3 items. So with that, here we go. Now the questions, let them come.
Questions from the commissioners?
Oh, I like this. Quick, Commissioner Rodriguez. We're going to turn it over to Chris Mills then.
I just want to note that I was at the county budget workshop last week, and the sheriff's department not only, you know, presented their full budget, but they also asked for 8.4 million more. So it's such a contrast to see that you're making it work. And so just curious, is this what the city asked you to do? They asked you to cut 2 point something off of your budget?
This is what we are directed to do, yes.
Okay. And then also just want to comment that it was also in the OIR report about promoting service, that the new recruits are interested in serving the community as a way, you know, of communicating the values of the Santa Barbara Police Department. And I just want to say that is my experience when I talk to officers, that when I've asked them or in workshops, what was your path to becoming an SBPD officer? And I don't think I heard anybody say law and order. I heard them say, I want to serve our community, or they were in school for counseling or psychology and decided to, their career was in policing. So I think we're on a good path, so.
And you're absolutely right, Commissioner Rodriguez. One thing I've been doing is I've been meeting with all of our officers and professional staff individually. And the first question I ask them is, why are you in policing? Because whether you're a sworn police officer or a professional staff, you're in policing. And the second question is, why Santa Barbara? But that is a common overarching theme. It's amazing the number of our officers and sworn staff that have degrees that are not in criminal justice, that are in psychology and other fields and communication, all of which apply to policing, but a lot of them don't come from a different background and viewpoint, which is really speaks to the culture of the organization.
Commissioner Dozer?
Chief, does the PD have any other source of revenue, like a foundation or anyone that helps?
So we have what is
Equipment or
called the
anything?
Police Foundation. They raise money, and typically what they provide is, they'll provide safety equipment sometimes for our special weapons team, which isn't specifically budgeted for. So it's typically specialty items such as that. They raise money towards our K-9 program. Sometimes they will do things towards the mental health piece, 1805, which exists countywide. You can submit for particular things, like they just funded Guadalupe for a generator. They actually fund all the county fire departments' mental health for all of the firefighters throughout the county. But in terms of other than, that, yeah, and those are for very specific items. We have very specific rules that we live by in public service, but there's not ways for us to really offset any of that.
My second question is, in the budgeting process, I don't see any mention here, and I know it's been a hot topic in the past, probably for a million years, of the location of the police department. Is there any talk of a new department, a new location, a larger?
So there is a new police station that, if all goes well, the dirt will be turned, and I hope you will all be there when the dirt gets turned in '24. And that would open in fall of '26. It is a project that all of us in this room are heavily involved with. The design, the city actually has hired a project manager that is city staff that is handling this project. So it is well on the way. I hope, the hope would be probably in a month to 2 months, we can share with the commission, because we are to the point now where we don't just have renderings, we have office schemes and actual layout that is in the final stages. So would love to be able to share that with the commission, because we look forward to instead of having everyone in 4 different places, being under one roof again.
Thank you.
And for clarification, that's being funded through Measure C, not
Correct.
through the police budget.
Yes, it's not through our budget and is outside of our budget.
If there's no more questions, we'll move to the next item.
No, Chair Rodriguez, we do have a caller online. I just want to announce
Oh,
to this
thank
caller
you.
if they would like to speak on this item. Since they are using their telephone, you'll have to press star 9 to raise your hand. And we can move to the next item.
Okay, thank you.
So item number 9, fiscal year 2024 budget review for the Santa Barbara Fire Department.
No, not that one. Oh, you do have to present after all. I'm going to sit right here with you.
Good afternoon, Chair Rodriguez, members of the commission. I am here solo today, but Chief Gordon says she's going to stay with me for moral support, so I appreciate that. Good afternoon, I'm Chris Males, I'm your fire chief. Normally, I would have some folks with me, but my business manager, Amy Van Atta, is committed, and my operations division chief, Brian Fetterman, is in the next room doing a budget meeting. So here I am. Just wanted to share a few things before we get started. Excuse me, some questions came regarding the city's budget status, and you've heard by now in the media that we face a structural deficit in the city. And so, as Chief Gordon stated, all the departments were instructed to make some cuts to our budget. And so, as we proceed through this, I'll share with what we were able to find and what we weren't able to find. Our department is very service-oriented. We don't bring in a whole lot of revenue to the fire department. As we proceed through this, there was very few areas that we were able to cut, but we did our best. So just a little bit about on the timeline. This is actually the first public hearing regarding our budget. Last week, there was a very high-level discussion regarding the budget at City Council, but did not dig into each department. This is the first time that the fire department's budget is being daylighted. So April 27th today, May 3rd is our budget hearing with City Council. We present along with the police department, and then June 7th is budget deliberations, and then shortly thereafter, the budget will be adopted. One disclaimer also is that the numbers that I'll be presenting today are pulled from charts that may be a couple of days old. As you may see in OpenGov, the numbers may be a little bit different, and that's because those are works in progress. There's no mistake, there's no problem, it's just clerical and technical use of the budget and making changes in real time versus the fact that this is just a static presentation. So any of the numbers that look different or anything that catches your eye shouldn't be a concern. That'll all be worked out in the budget with deliberations. So, let's see, let's get started. So some significant accomplishments for fiscal year 23 before we get into 24. Two large media items that you have seen in the last couple of weeks was a sharp departure from the past with the ambulance contract. The County Board of Supervisors elected to change the ambulance contract to a non-exclusive contract and allow both county fire and other companies that apply for permits to potentially become providers within the community. However, County Fire is going to be one of the main providers of ambulance service in our community. Why is that important? And each one of these points will, each one of these findings or accomplishments today will look back at what the budget, what the impacts on the budget. The ambulance contract, what was the goal of County Fire Department to get the ambulance contract? It was to provide a more robust ambulance deployment model and to keep revenue local in our community. So what we can expect to see in the next couple of months is increased service and potentially increased revenue coming back to the city in the form of either services or things like being able to send our folks to paramedic school paid for, to have equipment paid for that is on our fire apparatus, things like that. So that'll be a win. You also saw this week that we broke ground for a regional dispatch center slated to open in somewhere between March and May of 2024. However, our department will be joining in July of 24, right, in concert with the beginning of the fiscal year. I actually prefer that. So the center will open with County Fire, Montecito, and Carpinteria. They'll get the bugs out, and then we'll be joining the regional center along with Santa Maria and Lompoc at the time. Numbers are still being worked out on that, but with changes to the ambulance contract, we anticipate that there'll be changes to the money that the city either has to contribute or there'll be increased services coming out of the regional dispatch. Our standards of cover study is done. It's with the city administrator. She's currently reviewing it. So there'll be more information coming out on that. And along with the contractor or consultant, AP Triton, who did our standards of cover study, they are also doing a fee study. This is the most comprehensive fee study that the department has undertaken. We did one a couple of years ago that was kind of a cursory look. This is going to take a much deeper dive into the fees that the fire department charges to make sure that they're usual and customary charges. I'll just give you one example. Our fire prevention staff goes out and does an initial occupancy of a sprinkler alarm sprinkler system. There's a problem with it. They go back and do a reinspection. There's still a problem with it, and it goes on and on and on. We only charge an initial inspection, and then the re-inspects, we go back and go back and go back. Other fire departments charge after the first re-inspection. And so it really is a motivator to fix the problem the right way. So that's just one example of how fees can be structured. Other fees that are potentially available, believe it or not, we go to care facilities on a somewhat regular basis to help with lift assist calls, especially at night when their staffing is low. And so we actually, as the fire department, go out to licensed care facilities and help them put patients back into bed. That has become a usual and customary fee that fire departments are charging. So we may be looking at something like that, obviously all to be approved by council, but that's just a couple of examples. Okay, this is our organizational chart. As you have seen in the past, we have 106 FTEs. Fire chief at the top with my administrative assistant and my our IT technician, but he reports directly to me. And we have 4 divisions, business manager or administration, operations, fire prevention, and emergency services. What's important is that all of the positions now grayed out are covered by MOU. So our firefighters have an MOU that covers 80-plus personnel. And then our Fire Management Association also has an MOU which covers their 5 personnel. So, of course, MOUs are negotiated by the city. And so the MOU recently that was negotiated 3% per city finance has a price tag of about $709,000. So these are all, again, MOU items that were negotiated at the city level. But what this means is that, and what should be the take-home point of this, is that I don't have people that I can cut, nor do I want to cut any people. We, I think, have a very thin fire department. As you can see, we have very little administrative staff that works a 40-hour work week. The great majority of our fire department are those on the street serving the citizens of Santa Barbara. We have 29 people on duty every single day, and there is a term that I'd like you to know called constant staffing. Constant staffing. That means we don't ever run short. If we don't have 3 people for a fire engine, that fire engine's out of service. Okay, if somebody has to go to jury duty for 4 hours, we don't just shut the engine down and say, hey, hopefully nothing happens here for the next 4 hours. We replace that person with an overtime. And a person comes in and works time and a half for that. Wow, that sounds expensive. It's actually cheaper than having extra personnel on duty or floaters that we can put into that position. It's about 1.7 times to have an FTE. So full salary plus about 70% is the cost of benefits. So believe it or not, running a thinner or less robust organization and allowing our folks to work overtime is actually more cost effective than having additional personnel on duty. So constant staffing is absolutely critical, and that means if I send a fire truck out of town at 2 o'clock in the morning to go to Northern California for a fire, we are immediately calling people in to replace them. We don't want fire stations to go dark or browned out, and so that's the concept of constant staffing. So we're going to get to a slide about overtime, and you'll see constant staffing. Okay, so our general fund expenditure breakdown. Again, I would not focus so much on the numbers as I would look at the pie chart to the right. And as Chief Gordon spoke of, when you look at our entire budget, we really only have about 4% in discretionary funds. So if you look at the constant staffing, if you look at the MOUs, if you look at the cost of supplying our allocated costs, which we'll get to, the cost of fire engines, all that. When you look down at our entire budget, you'll see that we really only have about 4% where we're able to make cuts. So we were tasked, our budget is smaller than Chief Gordon's. We were tasked for FY24 to cut about $620,000 and for FY25, $960,000. So we really were tasked with cutting about $1.5 million from about $3.4 million. So when you look at those numbers, you'll see that it's a lot more dramatic than just simply taking a few percent off the top. So here's overtime. Overtime is a question that has been going on since we began probably with Dalmatians in the fire station and horse-drawn fire apparatus, was why are we paying so much overtime? It is industry standard to pay overtime. I can tell you when I started in 1993 at the City Fire Department, we had 13 people assigned to Station 1. There were 8 people needed. That meant 5 people were floaters. We used to call them suitcase firefighters. They'd get to the station and they'd pick up their suitcase and find out what station they were going to go work at. it was quickly realized that that was more expensive. And so our staff is actually less than it was 30 years ago. But how is our overtime spent? Predominantly in 3 areas. One is mutual aid. So if you look at the top or the gray line of mutual aid, you'll see wide variations in mutual aid from 2017 to 22, wide variations of mutual aid paid out. But what's important to remember is that is 100% reimbursed. Okay, the city, while that shows as an expenditure, you'll see it on the other side as a revenue, and I'll explain how that revenue works. Of course, also, as Chief Gordon mentioned, training is incredibly important. Okay, you've got to be trained in all of the hazards that we respond to, and you've got to be competent, and that's why we have a training division that keeps track of all of everything from our OSHA mandates to all of the idiosyncrasies of working in the city of Santa Barbara and specific to the city. And then you'll see constant staffing at the bottom. And so constant staffing is the cost of overtime. And again, that has to do with covering for firefighters' positions when they're gone from everything from annual vacation to illness, to jury duty, to training. While training is really allocated to training, but my point is that when someone's gone from that seat in the fire truck, we have to replace them. So that is a significant cost to the department. But again, as I mentioned, the drivers of not hiring additional people are not only the cost of the employee, but pensions and everything else. So mutual aid, just a word about mutual aid, and it's a guess. As far as when we get to the expenditures and the revenue, it's a guess. You could ask me right now what's going to happen this coming season for the wildland season, and I'll give you my best 30-year educated guess. But please don't hold me to it, because at the end of the year in January, you'll be like, what happened? I'll be like, we didn't get the heat, we didn't get the winds. It just didn't happen. But it's really important for you to understand that we are very committed to mutual aid, not only in the state, but across really the whole western United States. Our department will send as many as 18 people out of town at a time. While that doesn't sound like a lot, if you think about it, we have 29 people on duty, so that's over half of a shift that we will send out of town at any given time. That number could go a little bit higher in very certain circumstances, but really we think about 18. We are either reimbursed by the state through the Office of Emergency Services, or we're reimbursed by the federal government. When we bill, send people out, we bill at an overtime rate, because if it's Chris's normal day at work, but Chris is gone, Chris is getting paid, but then someone else is being paid to backfill my position at an overtime rate. So we bill overtime, we bill an administrative fee of 18%. We're also paid for the emergency vehicle, and we're paid for any other travel expenses, such as a couple years ago, I went to the Delta Fire in Northern California up by the Oregon border. We made it as far as Salinas, and we had to stay overnight. So all of the 22 firefighters in a hotel, we were all reimbursed by the state for that, because the city shouldn't be paying for that. So it's an example of the travel expenses. We typically budget about $1 million per year comes into our budget from the city to manage our overtime associated with mutual aid. We spent $2.3 million last year. It was a big year. If you remember, we hit our first fire of over 1 million acres in California. So we take a guess that it's going to be $1 million, but if we run out of money, we go back to council, we ask for more, and then, of course, it comes back in due time. We have somebody that keeps track of all of those hours and all of that money, and we do get paid back. So our out-of-town commitment, though, is all year round. Usually we think of it as being wildland season. That's the main driver, but we just had 6 people up in Mammoth, and with an urban search and rescue team that were dealing with people possibly trapped in houses or fires that were a result of propane explosions, et cetera. So we had 6 people deployed for, I think it was about 10 days. All that's reimbursed by the state. Okay, so here's, we'll get into our revenues. I'll just go rather quickly. Service charges for the department include fire inspections, but the biggest service charge is the fact that we have a fire station at the airport. The Airport Enterprise Fund pays for that fire station, so it's seen as a revenue in our budget. The airport also pays for a certain percentage of our support staff workload. And so really what it is that they pay for 100% of the cost of the city fire department maintaining Fire Station 8 at the airport. The intergovernment federal and state funds, you can see in FY22, $2.3 million we received from the state and federal government in reimbursement. This year, we're looking at about $616,000, but that could move up. And then you'll see proposed for FY24 and 25, $1 million. And again, I don't know if we'll be under or over. Other revenue, American Medical Response, our current ambulance provider, does pay all fire departments in the county what they call first responder fees. It's designed to reimburse us for the equipment that we use on EMS calls, such as defibrillator pads, defibrillators, oxygen cannulas, oxygen, things like that. So they pay a percentage of that. Again, with the ambulance contract that is changing, that money will continue to come in. Internal charges is the FY22 was a charge for us. It was just moving some money from the fire department to